I'm so glad everyone could join us here this evening, knowing that there's so much going on. And I really want to welcome you to our last of the Sober Second Thinker speaker series here at the Mulroney Institute of Government for this academic year. We're very fortunate to be featuring the Honourable Réjean Aucoin this evening to hear his experiences, thoughts, and insights into how he employs second thought at the Senate. I am Linda Harling-Stalker, the director of the Brian Mulroney Institute of Government, if you don't know me. This evening, we meet on Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The Mi'kmaq have stewarded this land since time immemorial. They have provided us with the 7 grandfathers' teachings of love, bravery, truth, wisdom, honesty, humility, and respect. May we keep these in mind as we continue the work of decolonialization and reconciliation. We do this as we are all treaty people. I am very pleased to be able to introduce our honored guest. Senator Réjean Aucoin's character-defining enthusiasm and convictions concerning the French-speaking Acadian community led him to be part of many different organizations over the years to do this very vital activist work in our province. He has established the Association des juristes d'expression française de la Nouvelle-Écosse. He is also the founder and president of the Council économique de Chéticamp. Both organizations have fostered the development and vitality of the region's Acadian community. Senator Aucoin has also served as Vice President of the Fédération des Associations des Juristes d'Expression Française de Common Law, Inc. How am I doing with the French? French immersion a long time ago. Vice President of the Société Nationale de l'Acadie, Vice President of the Fédération Acadian de la Nouvelle-Écosse, Vice President of the Community Radio Fund of Canada, and President of the Alliance des radios communautaires du Canada. Senator Aucoin has also published several books. He is the recipient of the Prix France Acadie for the children's book Le Tapis du Grand Pré, which was made into a movie and won the Prix Excellence at the Festival du Film d'Atlantique in 1986. His work and community engagement have won him numerous distinctions, including the 2007 Lawyers Award for the Association des juristes d'expression française de la Nouvelle-Écosse, the Community Development Award from the Nova Scotia branch of the Canadian Bar Association, and the Community Partner Award for the Alliance des radios communautaires au Canada. He's also named Volunteer of the Year by the Société Saint-Pierre de Chéticamp and received the Léger Camo Certificate of Merit from the Fédération Acadienne de la Nouvelle-Écosse. Senator Aucoin was appointed King's Counsel in 2014. He holds a Bachelor of Social Work and a Bachelor of Laws for the Université de Moncton, or like us hockey people know him as UDM, when they come here to play our team. Senator Aucoin lives in Chéticamp with his wife. He has 2 children and 1 grandchild. He enjoys reading, sports, cross-country skiing, and traveling. This evening, Senator Aucoin will be speaking on the challenges Chéticamp's French minority community is facing: language retention and erosion, access to French language services, cultural preservation, and the court challenges in obtaining a protected electoral district. He will also talk about his role in the Senate and his efforts towards protecting the Acadian minority in the province. After his talk, I will bring the microphone around for some engaging Q&A. It's your chance to ask the Senator whatever's on your mind. So please join me in welcoming the Honourable Réjean Aucoin to the podium.
Merci beaucoup. I did not know somebody had written a book on me. It's pretty, c'est pas mal incroyable. I hope I'm up to the challenge. Merci beaucoup, tout le monde d'être ici. I'm very glad to be here, and thank you for welcoming me here in such a kind and warm manner. J'allais dire très chaudement. Merci beaucoup. So, je vois beaucoup d'amis ici. Je suis content que vous êtes là. Et pour ceux, vous pouvez demander vos questions en anglais ou en français après. You'll be able to ask questions in French or English after, if you want. Merci, mesdames et messieurs, d'être venus. And this is very important, what we're doing and what you're doing in getting to engage people in talking and getting to people to know about the Senate. It's truly an honor to be here with you today during the month of la francophonie to speak about my role as an Acadian senator for Nova Scotia and my commitment to representing the French-speaking minority and minority communities in Nova Scotia, but elsewhere in Canada. Having been appointed to the Senate just a year ago, I suggested that maybe my experience in the Senate was not that extensive, so I would speak about my engagement in the Senate about language rights and the Acadian communities. The first part of the presentation is more of a written presentation. There'll be other things going on in the second part, and I'll be talking about my interventions in the Senate and why, and then I'll be talking about the court challenges case for getting a protected riding in Chéticamp, which is close to my heart. I'm particularly honored to be here in the Mulroney Institute of Government because as the Prime Minister, he was a strong supportive of Francophone rights. Amongst other things, he passed, during his reign as Prime Minister, there was the passing of the Official Languages Act in 1988, enhancing support for French minority education, promoting French in the federal institution, and strengthening ties with Francophone countries. Why do I choose to make a difference? When I received a call from Prime Minister Trudeau asking if I would accept the appointment to the Senate, I, of course, said yes. But I was mainly thrilled as an Acadian and Francophone to be part of the 10 senators from Nova Scotia. Maybe you don't know this, but there had been a gap of 10 years where there was no Francophone, qu'il n'y avait pas d'Acadian au niveau du Sénat. So there was no Acadian senator in the Senate. Bonjour, Eric. And so when I was appointed, I was very pleased, very humble, because for the first 2 days, and Martin would be, my brother-in-law, would certainly attest to that, all I had time to do in 2 days was say thank you, merci, for all the calls, the emails, the texts, and everything, and everyone coming and saying from all over Canada, from senators to MPs to just friends or acquaintances or people who didn't even know me, to congratulate me for having been appointed in the Senate. It's a very humbling experience. And it was also very humbling to stand up in the Senate, to be praised by all the groups in the Senate and basically why I had been appointed. So it was quite an event, quite an experience. Since the creation of Canada in 1867, and the first Acadian was appointed in 1907, then there's been about 6 Acadian senators from Nova Scotia. Now we have a second one, Alistair Surette, so that makes 7. And I was about the 996th senator appointed to the Senate of Canada in the history of Canada. That's quite an amazing feat for somebody from Chéticamp who never dreamed of becoming a lawyer or being here today to talk to you about the Senate and becoming a senator. Upon my appointment, I felt a profound responsibility to represent the interests of the Acadian community. Je voulais représenter ma communauté, les Acadians et les francophones de partout au Canada. And when people would ask me, what are your objectives? What are you going to do? Well, I would say, I'm first and foremost appointed as an Acadian senator, so I'll be there to represent the interests of the Acadian minority, and I represent Cape Breton and then Nova Scotia and my region, basically. Throughout my life, I've witnessed the challenges that our communities here in Nova Scotia and elsewhere in Canada face, whether to be language erosion, the fight for French language services, the struggle to maintain a cultural identity in a predominantly English-speaking province and country. And I couldn't forget about the fight to obtain Acadian schools. I may be talking about that a bit later. The Acadian people have deep-rooted history in this province, one filled with resilience, perseverance, determination. I'm the proof. It is my duty to advocate for policies to support our linguistic rights and cultural heritage. And that is my choice and my role as a senator and to represent my region. March is the month of la francophonie, a time when we celebrate the richness of the French language and the contribution that francophones, whether in Quebec or outside Quebec, including Acadians, have done for this province and for this country. Nova Scotia was founded, used to be l'Acadie, and this province was founded by the Acadians. And our ancestors go back to 1604, when we founded Port-Royal. Our language is not merely a means of communication, it is a bridge to our past, a link to our tradition, and the foundation for our future. I was just in Torbay yesterday and the day before, just to give you an idea what francophones, what Acadians went through. Torbay, after being deported, some of the Acadians came back to Nova Scotia following le Traité d'Utrecht in 1763 or the Treaty in Paris, I'm not sure. 1763, we were allowed to come back, but our lands in the Annapolis Valley were now taken over by the Loyalists, so we weren't allowed to come back. And there's people from Pointe-Coteau, they would understand what I'm talking about. So the people from Torbay were imprisoned on Georges Island, in Fort Edward and Fort Beauséjour. Oh, Senator Prosper, bonsoir. Nice to see you. My colleague, Senator Prosper, is here. Thanks for coming. So they were imprisoned when they were released in 1763. So they settled in Chéticamp. That's the people from Torbay. But land grants were only given in 1785. So in 1785, when the land grants were given, they were given to loyalist settlers. So again, the Acadians had no land grants, so they petitioned the government to give them land grants in Torbay, where there were no English-speaking, or there was no one. And if you go to Torbay today, well, if you can grow carrots and potatoes, that's about all you can grow because there's only shrubs and rocks. But they settled there to do fishing. So that's how the people from Torbay came to live in that area. And before they were allowed to move there, they had to sign the oath of allegiance to the Crown and to agree to settle in small groups. The contributions of Acadians and Francophones of Nova Scotia's cultural and collective identity are beyond measure. From music to literature to culinary tradition and economic input, including fishing, we have shaped this province in countless ways. Our joie de vivre, our deep sense of community, and our strong work ethics continue to enrich the fabric of this province. The system of dikes called the Poitou were designed by the Acadians, and those are the dikes that we still find today in Annapolis Valley and in the Chignectou Isthmus. And we managed to unearth, or 3 abattoirs, original abattoirs were unearthed in Nova Scotia. There's one in the Musée Acadian de Pomnico Est. There's one in Grand Pré at the historic site. And there's a third one in Larry's River, which they're waiting to get a cultural center to display it. And that one was found on a property that someone had bought. And they found this old abueto that was still in pretty good shape. And I saw it yesterday. The challenge facing Chéticamp as a French minority. And this is one of the communities that would embody what the challenges that we face today. However, despite this rich Acadian heritage that we have, like many others, we face significant challenges and we're threatened by the linguistic and cultural, or our linguistic and cultural survival is sometimes at risk. Because French has been spoken to Chéticamp since 1785 when it was founded, but it's becoming increasingly difficult, which each passing year, the number of young people speaking French as their primary language is decreasing. Exposure to English, media, and everyday life is leading to language erosion. If we do not take action, our unique Acadian language and culture and dialect may disappear, and assimilation and the downturn of our economy and population has taken its toll. Access to French language services, one of the most pressing issues for minority francophones, is access to essential services in French, whether it's healthcare, government support, or any other support. We're forced to navigate many of these things in English. The lack of accessibility and barriers for French-speaking citizens threatens the vitality of our language. Our reality is that every time we step out of the community, we have to speak English. In itself, that's not a problem. If we want to go see a doctor like Dr. Rice, well, she speaks a bit of French, so we're okay there. But it's taking its toll mostly on young families where parents don't realize the importance of educating their children in French and may not speak to them in French and may not bring their children up in French, although they are Acadian. And that's the problem in a lot of our Acadian communities. People don't realize the value of being bilingual, and they don't necessarily transmit that information to, or that desire to, their children. And as I was in Torbay the other day, there's 2 generations that don't speak French. The grandparents do, their children and grandchildren don't. Now they've got a French school as of last year. So the 4th generation is now studying French. But I was speaking to a lot of the elders, and most of them only speak English. But they realize what they have lost and what their children have lost. And now they're trying to make sure that it doesn't happen to their grandchildren. So, but in Chéticamp or in Pomquette or in Richemont, L'Île Madame, it's not the same thing. Some parents don't realize how important it is to keep that language and in order to become bilingual. I stand here myself today to speak to you in English. I'm going to a conference in India in French on AIDS and Ebola, at the end of the month. It's going to be in French. I was at Université Saint-Anne doing the same thing I'm doing here last week or 2 weeks ago. And I was in Pomquette today speaking to the children in French. And I'm speaking here to do in English. So that's the beauty of being bilingual. We're flexible. We can go everywhere, almost around the planet. Now the Senate. When appointed, I was asked what my objective was or plans. Actually, it took me off guard because I wasn't necessarily expecting to be appointed. I had applied 4 years earlier because now with Justin Trudeau, there was a system where you applied to the Senate, and if you were chosen, then you would get a call from the Prime Minister. So, but actually what I told reporters was my object is to represent the Acadians to the best of my ability and make sure that if any act comes to the Senate, that would have some bearing on our Acadian and Francophone communities, that's what I would be prepared to do, is make sure that I would be there to defend our Acadian communities. So to put it in the context, I'd only been in the Senate for 2 weeks when the Bill 35 came to the floor. That's the Canada Early Learning and Childcare Act, where the government was funding a $10 a day childcare program. Well, as an Acadian senator from New Brunswick had proposed an amendment, I felt compelled to speak on it because I really wanted to make sure that the French minority communities would be included. And what we found, or what the amendment said, is basically over and above, and on the financial section, it should state that there would be funding for First Nations, but also for minority Acadian or Francophone communities and English communities in Quebec. And that phrase was not there. And we felt, and the reason, and I'll talk about that in a minute, the reason why it was important is I chose to talk about the situation when we had to fight to obtain our schools in Nova Scotia. Now there's the CSAP with 23 French language schools in the province, but at the time we had English schools even in Chéticamp and Clare, Argyle, and Richmond. So the bill was tabled with the amendment to include that there would be funding for minority language communities and Indigenous communities also. So I added my voice to it, and I'll show you a video about what I did, what I spoke about that day. It was mostly, I did the history of the fight we had to get French language schools. And the amendment was that if the province did not provide places for Acadian minority for daycare places, then if the matter had to go to court, the judge could not throw it out because it wasn't mentioned in the financial clause. It was as simple as that. There was a lot of other things that we would have liked to include in the act that wasn't there, but that was the most important, and that's the one that was suggested. It had been refused in the House of Commons. It was refused at now I don't know if it was the legal committee or the official language committee, but it was refused in committee, and then it came to the chamber for third reading. So I'll ask the technician to show it.
We are resuming debate on number 2 on the amendment on Bill C-35. Senator Aucoin.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Il est quand même...
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a little late. I thought my colleague, Mr. Gosner, would help me if I fell asleep, but unfortunately he's not here to do so. Thank you to all those who spoke before me and who supported the motion. I agree with your comments, and thank you, Senator Patterson, who clarified that Indigenous communities and official language communities should work together, and that bill, or rather the amendment, does not go against that. Colleagues, senators, thank you for giving me the time to speak, and thank you for your kind words when I was sworn in. It was very touching. I hope that I will be able to rise to the occasion. I'm speaking to you soon after my appointment because I cannot remain silent. I need to speak on the amendment to Bill C-35. Who am I? I'll tell you a bit about myself because it will give you a bit of context as to my comments. I'm from Chéticamp, a small French-speaking Acadian enclave in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. Today, there are about 2,500 people who still speak French. In 1991, Nova Scotia's Francophones and Acadians were spread over 10 regions and accounted for approximately 3.9% of the population, or around 35,000 people. Now, there are 26,775 people who spoke French as their first language, or 2.8% of the population of over 1 million.
I grew up in Chéticamp, but studied in Moncton and Paris. Before becoming a lawyer at the age of 37, I worked as a journalist for Radio-Canada and also worked in Francophone communities and Acadian communities. And so I know these Acadian and Francophone communities very well, having crisscrossed my province and the country from one end to the other. In school, all my education in my village was in English, except for French and from grade 9 on, history. At the time, the Inverness County School Board was made up of about 9 unilingual Anglophone members. And they managed dozens of English-speaking schools, except those in Chéticamp, which was likely also an English-speaking school. Needless to say, French language education for Acadians was not their priority. I think Indigenous senators in the room can surely understand what I am talking about. So I'm going to talk about education in Nova Scotia and Section 23 to explain why this motion is important. In 1982, with the advent of the Charter, I thought our community would finally have its own homogenous French school, but that was an illusion. In 1985, we had to organize a Yes campaign and a petition, an answer to a plebiscite from the municipality, which had no jurisdiction on the matter. We also had to show the government that we did indeed want a homogenous French school. We had to fight against the English language media and public opinion, which called us separatists as well as racists, among other things. The naysayers claimed that graduates of a homogenous French school in Chéticamp would not speak English at all. But what I can say is that my daughter Arielle, after having moved to Chéticamp, already spoke English. I did not encourage her to do so. The prefect of the municipality of Inverness County at the time, during a public meeting attended by some 500 people from the community, said, and I quote, "Over my dead body, there will be a unilingual French school in Chéticamp," end quote. Well, that prefect has passed away, God bless him, because we got our school. However, it wasn't without its repercussions. People were threatened. A car was set on fire by the people who were against it. And to this day, some people are still identified according to the yes or the no camp. I'll let you guess which camp I myself was in. At the time, I had no idea that 7 years later, at the age of 37, I would become a lawyer, let alone be standing here before you today to tell you about it. Nova Scotia, notwithstanding the party in power, did much the same thing in all the province's Acadian communities, asking who wanted a homogenous French school. This led to many conflicts, delaying the province's obligations under the Charter, and this to give us homogenous French-speaking schools. Despite the Charter. For my part, my daughters were born in 1988 and 1990, graduated in 2000 and 2002, still in the old Chéticamp school, parts of which were over 40 years old. During this period, a new English school was built in Belle-Côte, and many Acadians attended it. Some, though, were assimilated.
Ask yourself why I'm telling you all this. Bear with me. I intend to make parallel between C-35 and the amendment proposed by Senator Cormier. I'll talk about the minority language education history in Nova Scotia. In order to do that, I have to talk about Doucette-Boudreau versus Nova Scotia Minister of Education. In this case, which went up to the Supreme Court of Canada, it dealt with the right of French language schools for the Acadians and Francophone of Nova Scotia. In 1998, 16 years after the repatriation of the Charter, and Article 23 guaranteeing the right to official minority language education, the province had yet to award the funds necessary to construct or renovate or provide the programs needed. Justice Leblanc, in his decision, declared that the province, although it did not deny that the Acadians and Francophone minorities of the province were guaranteed an education in their language, had in fact failed to deliver on their promises. And here is what the judge said at paragraph 4, 5, and 6. At paragraph 4, although the government eventually announced the construction of the new French language school facilities, construction of the promised schools never began. Paragraph 5, the real issue was not the existence of the content of the applicants' Section 23 rights, but the date on which the programs and facilities would be finally made available. And paragraph 6, the respondent had not given sufficient attention to the serious rate of assimilation among the Acadians and Francophones in Nova Scotia. The province treated Section 23 rights as if there were but one more demand for educational programs and facilities, and failed to accord them the due priority as constitutional rights. The Nova Scotia situation is not unique. Cases such as Doucette-Boudreau can be found in most provinces and territories, as parents of the Francophone minorities had to go to court over a number of years to obtain the right to have their children educated in their language. J'en viens maintenant à l'amendement proposé.
I will now come back to the proposed amendment. The official language minority communities are mentioned 3 times in Bill C-35, but they do not appear in the preamble or in Section 8, which deals of funding. This amendment takes nothing away from the bill. Essentially, it adds to Section 8 that funding is also for official language minority communities. Courts would be obligated to take this into account if ever an action were filed in court. This clarification removes any ambiguity as to whether funding applies to linguistic communities. Here's what Professor Larocque said in committee. He is Research Chair in Linguistic Rights and Issues at the University of Ottawa. Without the proposed amendment to Section 8, official language minority communities risk being deprived of the federal funding necessary for the long-term maintenance of early learning and childcare programs and services. He goes on to say that we would be wrong to believe that the project as written without the amendment guarantees that linguistic communities will receive their share of funding. Friday, I spoke with Suzanne Saulnier, Executive Director of the Centre d'appui à la petite enfance de la Nouvelle-Écosse, created about 30 years ago to bring together approximately 16 Francophone daycares in Nova Scotia. So all Francophone daycares in Nova Scotia. And I quote, she said, despite a federal-provincial agreement signed on July 13th, 2021, Few new spaces have been created specifically in French language early childhood centers for the Canadian community, and this despite the 18 new spaces announced for the Wedgeport area. These spaces are not available due to delays in school construction. We applied for funding in February 2022 and again in October 2022, but we still haven't received any additional funds from this agreement. There isn't even room for little ones aged 18 months to 3 years at Chéticamp or L'Île Madame. We represent the 16 Acadian and Francophone early childhood centers in the province, but we have no idea how much money we'll get from this new agreement. How much is reserved for Acadians and Francophones, and when we'll be able to benefit from it. What's more, our association has no seat on the consultation table formed following the agreement, despite our involvement over the past 30 years. I note Senator Cordy's comments about the money Nova Scotia will allocate to early childhood education, rather. However, what guarantee do we have that the province's Acadians and Francophones will get their share? For her part, Nicole Arsenault-Slater, president of the Société de l'Acadie du Nouveau-Brunswick, whom I spoke to on Friday, said she was in favor of adding official language communities in minority settings to Article 8 because this would ensure their funding in a more concrete way. She said, and I quote, "There aren't enough French language daycare centers, and some parents have no choice but to enroll their children in English language daycare centers, which results in their enrollment in English language schools. As a result, their children end up losing their mother tongue. Maybe French-speaking parents in every province and territory won't have to take turns suing their governments to get funding for daycare centers and their administration. But are you willing to take that risk as senators? I know I'm not. Especially given what's happened in Nova Scotia. Following the signing of the new 2022 agreement, I haven't seen any results. For the Indigenous peoples in this country, even though the bill makes numerous references to them, nothing is guaranteed. Our communities are not in competition with each other, but must work together to claim their share of early childhood care for generations to come. And I'm here today to tell you that even if this small amendment passes, it's not even the preamble of the bill, even if this very small amendment is adopted, nothing guarantees that my province will make more spaces for French speakers when they will be attributed and whether it will be the same thing that is applied to other provinces. And so, dear senators, I encourage you to vote in favor of this amendment. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. It was a bit long, but I felt that it was important that you saw what happens in the Senate, how we're allowed to debate. That's where I think we have 15 minutes at the maximum, and we're also able to do statements. But I want to add one thing is during the time, well, we started in 1982 with the Charter, then we're now in the 1990s, and during the time that before they renovated the school in Chéticamp, they built a new school in Marguerite, as I said in there, and they also built 32 English unilingual schools in the province before they renovated the school in Chéticamp. So although we're supposed to be treated equal, you look at the facts. So that was on the amendment on that bill C-35. And I was told, a few senators came to see me after and they said, I was planning to vote against, but now I'm going to plan to vote. The vote was for the next day, and it passed in the Senate, and it went to then back to Parliament, to the House of Commons. They still didn't want to pass that amendment, but then there was other political pressures put, and a few of us and letters were sent to some of the MPs, and it finally passed, and the government said that it was fine. The reason the lawyers were saying that they didn't want that included in the financial clause, and that's part of the work that we have to do, is try to convince MPs or negotiate, if possible. Their lawyers in the House of Commons was telling them that if we included that clause in there, then we as minority language communities, as Indigenous communities, that would give us a direct link to the government, and we could deal or negotiate directly with them, which was not true, which isn't true. But that's what they were saying to their MPs, and that's why the government was reluctant to agree to it. But it finally passed, and now that wording is in the Act. I also spoke on two or three other matters. Every time there's some issue that deals with Acadian communities, or something that touches the Francophone communities in Canada, I've told the Senate numerous times, I'm going to stand up and speak about it. And what I did, that's what I did on the C-40, which is the act to review people that have been falsely incarcerated. So the government wanted to put a commission together, and Senator Prosper and I proposed. There was no time to propose an amendment, but we did put in a question and a point of law saying that it's called the Miscarriage of Justice Review Act. So what wasn't in there for me was the fact that it said that when they appointed the commissioners, they had to take into consideration the Black community, the Indigenous community, and also but they did not talk about the Official Languages Act. So there was no guarantee that any one or all of the commissioners would be bilingual. And to me, that was important. So I stood up in the Senate to talk about that. I also stood up on a few other acts that did not mention it. Now, mind you, I've been on the parole board, and I was appointed as a bilingual member of the parole board. That doesn't mean that the Minister of Justice will not appoint any bilingual commissioners or members of the commission, but why not put it in there? And I basically told them, if nothing else, put it in there and I'll stop talking. So at least it'll be in there, and it doesn't guarantee, even if it's in there, it says to take into consideration the Official Languages Act. That's all it says. How will they take it into consideration? Will it be one member, two members, five members? We don't know. It's like the same thing with the Indigenous and Black members take into consideration. There's no numbers of how many will be from those communities. And I also spoke on the Isthmus of Chéticamp, which is Bill S-273. The government had decided that the bridge in Quebec was of national importance, à l'avantage du Canada. But the Isthmus of Chéticamp, where millions of merchandise transit through between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia and between Canada. And then we also have telecommunication cables, CN Rail, and the Trans-Canada Highway. If that land base was washed out, we'd be in dire trouble in Nova Scotia. So there was a bill passed by a private member of the Senate, and it was voted in the Senate and sent to the House of Commons to try to declare it to the advantage of Canada. Now, the House of Commons or the government did not want that to happen, but that's where it's at today. Even though it's declared to the advantage of Canada, doesn't automatically mean that the government has to fund it all. The government would wait and wait and wait until the province kick in. So, but it gives more opportunity, it puts more pressure on Canada to fund it. So French minority communities have played an important role in shaping Nova Scotia and the Canadian politics, policies advocating for minority rights and strengthening democracy, rather than taking anything away from Canada, French minorities enhance Canada's linguistic and cultural fabric. And this dates back to the creation of the Senate. So for those who don't know, the Senate, when it was created, had Upper Canada, Lower Canada, and the Maritimes. So 24 Senate, 24 basically, and it was based on population. So Quebec was afraid that it would lose their importance and also their language, and the Maritimes didn't want, because we were not very populated. We felt that Ontario and Quebec would have too much weight. So that's why the Fathers of Confederation decided to have a second chamber. So when Canada was created, there were 24 senators from Quebec, 24 senators from Ontario, and 24 from the Maritimes. So to even it out. And after the Prairie provinces joined in, there was 24 for out west, and then there was 6 from Newfoundland. And so now we have 105. But so the principle of protecting minorities doesn't date from me or yesterday or from the Acadian. It dates back to Confederation. I'll now talk about the protected electoral districts or the protected riding, directly linked, not directly linked to the Senate, but dear to my mind, and you'll ask questions on that too, hopefully. So that was another challenge that we faced in Chéticamp. The last member of the House of Assembly, our last MLA, to be able to speak French in Inverness County was in 1925. And put it this way, and then there's Section 3 of the Charter. Section 3 of the Charter of Rights says that you're entitled to effective representation. So, but if the people of Chéticamp, who are about 2,500 French speaking, all decided to vote for one candidate, but the rest of the county votes for the other candidate, well, does that give us effective representation? Apparently no, and the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia agreed with us, but it took 28 years. We went to the Court of Appeal first. We won that case. And then we had to go back to the Supreme Court because the first time we went to court, it was on a question, it was on a referendum, and we won on a technicality. But back in 2019, the third commission still came back and did not recommend that Chéticamp become a protected riding. Now, a protected riding, all it means is that it can vary by more than 25%. So Clare, Argyll, Richmond, and Preston, which was the Black community, got protected ridings. And they are about in the 50 to 60% smaller than other ridings in Nova Scotia. Like in Halifax, there would be around 17,000. Now in Clare, they're about 9,000. So it's about in 50%. So in order to get fair representation in Chéticamp, we had to bring the government to court, because although the Electoral Boundaries Commission did not recommend that we get a protected riding, the province could still have given us a protected riding. They could have overruled, because the last decision is made by the province. So Nova Scotia created protected ridings in 1990 to ensure effective representation of the Black community and the Acadian community. But Chéticamp was denied for 28 years, for 3 commissions. In part, and to put you in the context of Chéticamp, you've heard about it a bit, but Chéticamp has a French population, as we said. We have 1 councillor on the Inverness County Council, and which speaks French. The other councillors are all English. No one else speaks French. On the school board, like you heard, we had over a number of years before the creation of le CSAP, we had 9 or 10 school board members for Inverness County, and there was, at one point, there were none from Chéticamp. but 9 people did basically, 8 Anglophones decided the education for my children and the children of Chéticamp. And French wasn't allowed to be taught in French when my parents were growing up. So for the provincial ridings, Chéticamp never had one, and so we decided to go to court with the help of the Acadian Federation. And Chéticamp would be the l'épitome, I don't know what it is in English, of what assimilation means today. When I said we're going to go to court to the members of the Acadian Federation, that would be the most pro-French people in Chéticamp, they said, who are we to go to court against the province to get a protected electoral riding? Because we've never had a voice. We've never had an MLA. We've never had, well, we've had one warden that was from Chéticamp, not the one who said over my dead body, but another, a Mr. Boudreau. So I was volunteer on that case. And also, they hired me as a lawyer for about 10 years that we were involved. So I pleaded that case with another lawyer, with Noëlla Martin from Halifax, and before Justice Boudreau, Justice Mew, sorry. And every argument that we told the judge was in the decision, and he basically agreed with everything that we said. And what Justice Muse basically said is the commission had not looked at Chéticamp as it should have and as it looked at the other protected ridings. For example, and I'll give you examples, and you can ask questions later on if you're interested, and I'll talk more about it. But they said, well, it's too small. There's not the population. And it's true. There's only 2,500 people. But in their first report, the commission said, how about up to Doyle Bridge, which would give you 2,800 electors? Well, that would be maybe 85% or 80% above or smaller than the average. But the commission did not look at Les Îles-à-Madeleine, 40 miles away from Chéticamp in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. They have a riding that is 77% smaller than any other provincial riding in Quebec. They said we can't combine both ridings in Chéticamp and Richmond because it's too far. They did not look at Chéticamp with the same eyes as they looked at Clare, Argyll, and Richmond, where they said, well, they're independent communities. They've been there for 200 years. They're economically viable, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And also our experts said before deportation, there was one Acadian community in Nova Scotia, which consisted of all the Acadians. And after deportation, then the Acadians found themselves in Clare, Argyll, Chéticamp, and Richmond. So there was 4. But they did not treat Chéticamp with the same eyes as they did with the other commission. So Justice Muse basically accepted all our pleadings. And he said, so one of the things he said is prior to deportation, there was one community, but after deportation, the Acadians, as I said earlier, were not allowed to come back to Nova Scotia, to the Annapolis Valley. So, and we were forced to sign the oath of allegiance and also to settle in small groups. So it's not by will that we are a small community in Chéticamp. They did not treat it as a unique community. And the judge said that they should have looked at what made Chéticamp unique and try to correct some of the issues from history. Like they also expropriated, Chéticamp was expropriated for the national park, like 36 families were moved. I also said, which I didn't think the judge would accept, I also said, well, also when the Registry of Motor Vehicle, the province decided to move the office, they moved it to Bedek. So that's 2 jobs that went to Bedek. Now we have very limited French services. But had we had an official MLA in Chéticamp, maybe it would have made a difference. when Fisheries and Ocean moved their sub-office from Moncton to Antigonish, maybe if we had an MLA, would have known about it, would that office have moved to Chéticamp, things like that. So that was one of the things that we discussed, and it was things that the judge took into consideration to say that the commission had not done its work properly. As we're speaking, the province is now is in the process of setting up a new commission. They have 20 months to set up a new commission and render its report. Hopefully this time we will get an Acadian MLA, an Acadian riding, and get an Acadian elected, and for the first time in 100 years. So that would be a major win. But in 2029, there will be another commission and there will be an election. And there's no guarantee that in 2029, we would get another protected riding. And it might be 85% smaller than the rest of the province. But I'm putting it to you that what would it be? A drop in the bucket as far as a budget, as the budget of the province, to have one more MLA. And actually, what also happened that was interesting, two things happened. There was a vote whether Chéticamp would become a protected riding or not on a, let's say, on a Thursday night. But there was one person missing from the commission that day. So the vote was, the president did not vote. So the vote, I think, was 4-3. But the other members that voted against met with the other person that wasn't there, and the next morning, and then a new vote was held that day, and then the vote was 5-4. So the 4 people that voted to obtain a protected riding for Chéticamp wrote a dissenting letter, and the judge quoted that letter in his decision and said that more should have been, it should have been addressed. And so you see, there were things like that. There's politics played at every turn in our lives. So the path forward, challenges for Acadians of Nova Scotia are significant, but not insurmountable. I firmly believe that with the right policies, community engagement, and a collective commitment to our language and culture, we can turn the tide. As a senator, my goal is to continue to push for stronger federal support for French language education, improve access to bilingual services, and measures that promote cultural preservation. I will work with community leaders, organizations, and all levels of government to ensure that Acadians and Francophones in Nova Scotia and in Canada and their voices are heard and respected. In conclusion, the strength of people lies in the ability to adapt, to stand together, and to never lose sight of its identity. The Acadian people have faced many challenges, many hardships throughout history, but we're still here. We have always found ways to rise. Today, we face new challenges from over the border, if nothing else. But I'm committed to be a voice for the Nova Scotia Acadians and Francophone in the Senate. I would like to close with a fun note. Next week is Mi-Carême in Chéticamp. If you happen to be seeing people dressed in Halloween costumes, well, it's not Halloween, it's Mi-Carême. So that's one of our traditions that has endured and is still being ran in Chéticamp, probably one of the only places left. But a few places are trying to revive it. So if you happen to be there next week, make sure you join in. And you're also welcome to visit my office, because if you come to Ottawa, I'd be very happy to meet with you. But our tradition for Mi-Carême is just one more tradition that enriches the fabric of our country, Canada, the envy of the world, and that we are so proud of. Merci. Thank you. Miigwech.
Thank you very much, Senator Aucoin, for such an engaging talk. So we have about half an hour or so for questions. So I have a mic that I'll take around to folks. As the Senator said, you can ask in English or Francais. And I just ask that you just kind of keep them succinct. So are there any questions out there?
Lovely speech. It was very cool hearing about the topic. And I had a question in terms of, because you mentioned media and how there's a lack of media that young folks can enjoy to help them in their pursuit of knowing the language. And I was wondering what you'd like to see change. In Canada, we have a thriving film industry, but often not a lot of our stories are being told in those films. So I was wondering what your view of media and the role it plays in language adoption.
Well, good question. What is starting to happen, or what has happened in the last maybe few decades, is we're seeing maybe out of New Brunswick and l'Office National du Film or private productions, we're seeing more Acadians in films. And also there's like Le Petit Béliveau, for example, who's touring basically the world. So the more we can see ourselves in media, in films, in stories, and also in Chéticamp, we're going to celebrate next year 25, I think it's 25 years for the community radio station. So things like that really, really help. And I can say, honestly, before the radio station came about in Chéticamp, you could not find a book or a CD. Well, maybe it was 8 tracks or cassettes at the time, but you wouldn't have been able to find anything in French in Chéticamp. Now people listen to the community radio. I don't always, because some of the local talent, like one of my friends always says, well, that must be another one that they told him he could sing when he was young. So it's sometimes it's hard to listen to all that because it's very, very local. But again, the radio is not necessarily for me. It's for them, and they listen to it, and they make up the shows and play the music that they want. But it's very important. So more of that media. And Le Courrier is a small French newspaper. What the example I can give is, if you don't talk about your dog or some people's dog or their baby or the event in Chéticamp or elsewhere in the paper, nobody's going to read it. But if you talk about them, they're going to buy it and read it. But now with what's happening with all the major medias in the U.S. and that they've cut off the funding to provide money for Canadian content, like Netflix, and so there's a conflict there. So the more we can provide and talk about us, the better it is, and the more proud the young people will be, who will be the future generation.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I just wonder whether there are other senators representing the Acadian community, maybe in New Brunswick or other provinces, and whether you come together and strategize to advance the interests of the Acadian community in general.
Well, good question again. What we did in the Senate, shortly after I was appointed, I was approached by another Senator Cormier, and I had the idea of forming, and also from the MP Chris d'Entremont, we have formed a friendship group called l'Association Acadienne des Parlementaires, or l'Association Acadienne des Parlementaires Canadiens. So basically, we've regrouped together the Acadian senators and MPs. And we haven't done much up to now, but we've met a few times, and now we're waiting after the elections to see. What we did, we commissioned a study to say, okay, what is this? How can we strengthen the Acadian presence on Parliament Hill or in Canada, in the federal sphere? So there were quite some interest. There were 4 paths that the researchers came with. They said, well, one of the things you could do is you could have a policy saying that le peuple acadien, the Acadian people, are recognized in Canada, because there's only two laws that mention le peuple acadien. There's only two federal laws. The one on the celebration of the 15 août, le 15th of August, and la commémoration de la déportation, to mention the expulsion of the Acadians. That's the only two federal acts since 1867 that mention the Acadian people. So we could have a policy or a motion saying that we recognize that the Acadian people are a separate entity from the Quebec or whatever. So those are some of the things that came out.
Merci.
Bonjour,
Sénateur
Eric.
Aucoin. There's a number of pressure groups in Canada to put forward all kinds of interests, sometimes in opposition to each other. I'm curious to see how you and other Acadian and Francophone senators within or outside of Quebec are building alliances across the country to foster not only what's dear to your heart about the promotion of Acadian culture, but basically French, also in a context where Quebec obviously is a different player, but all kinds of other issues, social issues, cultural issues, environmental issues and whatnot, that how can you also help this country to be a better place within your tenure, not only from strictly the language and cultural perspective, but a more broader perspective? Thank you.
Puis juste pour comprendre, are you asking if there's a French connection do we have a French connection to do that? Is that what you're asking?
It's part of the question, but I think my question is broader.
Okay.
That, you know, to transform this country into a better place, at least from your perspective, but from your starting point as an Acadian, what's going on in the Senate and in Ottawa generally to try to improve things from all those perspectives?
Okay. But it's funny because one of the things that when I was appointed that I found funny or curious, or like even within Nova Scotia, we don't have a caucus, or we don't meet as senators from Nova Scotia to discuss an issue because we're all in all different groups. But there's maybe no incentive or no reason to meet. And for across Canada, it's probably the same thing, except we do have 17 committees in the Senate. And that's where people get together to discuss issues on a certain point. For example, on fisheries. I was on fisheries and we discussed the Elver problem. I was on fisheries, we discussed the problem with the lamprey. So there's people from there could be people from different provinces, different areas, French and English, and First Nations and Acadians and people from Quebec. So through those committees, yes, that is where the work is done, and that's where we get experts to come and discuss issues that affect Canada. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Senator Prosper. You're here. I'll be happy to hear what you have to say. Add to that.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the question. I think a good starting point, it's a core element of Senate work, the work at committee level, because you have a number of bills usually coming from the other place, the House of Commons, and as they come, we're quite aware of the dialogue that has taken place there, but it's another opportunity to, again, improve those laws. And so we have that opportunity to interview witnesses that haven't been considered before, to round out the evidence and to allow those laws to be more reflective of the values of all Canadians. So in my respect, it's just not Indigenous people, and maybe with Senator Aucoin, it's just not Acadians. It's what's for the betterment of all Canadians that we're focusing on there. So it's really interesting to have that form within the Senate because you have longer longevity. We're appointed. We're not subject to elections, and it really we're not bound. We're not partisan to a particular party, and so we're allowed to maybe look at things from a different lens, and that is what I find a major contribution. And I just want to also recognize Senator Aucoin in terms of his leadership. It's really helped somebody like me, seeing him stand up and speak to the issues that are important to him, because that's what people need to hear. Our issues are important from a variety of perspectives, and I just wanted to recognize you for that. Thank you.
Merci. You too.
Thank you so much, Senator, for such an excellent and powerful presentation. I really appreciated when you talked about the importance of the Acadian communities to the fabric of the culture of Nova Scotia, and the reminder to think with that. And just wanted to take this moment to celebrate, as part of that history, Clarendon Robichaud, who is a key figure in Nova Scotia's accessibility movement and founder of Transport Declare. So this was an accessible transportation system for seniors and people with disabilities. And Robichaud was so powerful because he really kind of led the way for thinking about what accessibility could look like across the province, and played an important role in the community contributions to Nova Scotia's Accessibility Act. So here's my question. The community really engaged with the legislative process in developing the Act. And one thing that they contributed to was the preamble. You can hear it. It sounds different. And it talks about the poverty that people with disabilities face. The Act itself is more framework legislation. You talked about the preamble in the case that you shared, and that it was important. Can you say more about the importance of a preamble? Because sometimes they're kind of dismissed as not important. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, the preamble is some legislation has a very little or no preamble. But some legislation like C-35 on the child care program has a lengthy preamble. I think it's like 2 pages. And it talks about the importance of child care, because the importance for and I don't remember offhand all it says, but you see, it's important for parents. In today's world, parents have to go to work, and in order to go to work, they need childcare, and that childcare has to be affordable, and it's important and that I remember distinctly, it's important for the Indigenous communities. It's very important for them because they're at the end of the spectrum. They've been ignored for so long, and when I was reading it for the first time, it's one of the things that I noticed, that the government absolutely wanted us as senators to be aware that it was important to address child care places for Indigenous communities, because they've been ignored, and because of everything that's been happening in Canada. And what we've discovered lately. And one of the things that I was hit with was, or that it didn't mention the linguistic communities. And then we went to Section 8 on the financing clause, and that's where somebody proposed an amendment. So the preamble is where it sets why, and the context of why we have this legislation. So it's very important, and it can give lots of reason. And if ever the Act goes, if ever there's an action brought in court, then sometimes the judges will look at the preamble to inspire and try to understand and to come to a decision about one of the issues. So the preamble is very important. And like you said, in the Transport Declare, if we're talking about accessibility, it might have colored the act into why the act was done. That's the best I can tell you without having read the one you're talking about.
Sorry if this is a bit of a, I guess, a little bit more simplistic question, but I'm interested to hear what you say. As someone who's an Anglophone in a rural Nova Scotian community, is there anything that you would suggest someone like me could do to help promote, I guess, like Francophone, I guess, influence in the province, like outside of just, I guess, emailing the MLAs?
Well, yeah, there's certainly a lot of things you can do. First of all, if you meet a Francophone on the street or me, don't say I don't speak French once you've heard the first word, because that's what we were told all through our lives, because people would not even wait for the question, or when we had phone operators. Like, who has not studied in school numéro 1 jusqu'à 10? But the phone operators at the time would say, sorry, I don't speak French. But they hadn't even heard the number. So, but you can go to see Petit Béliveau. Petit Béliveau is show. But be open-minded. That's all we're asking. And for all of us as a community to be open-minded to other cultures. That's what's important. And not be bigots or do anything about it. Like, just be open-minded. Thanks. Thank you for the question. Oui.
Bonjour. So we're from Pumpkett, and for those of you who don't know, that's about 15 minutes from here. Pumpkett usually, I would say, has found itself in the middle of everything in Nova Scotia and surrounded by English. It's been very hard to keep that language. And I guess I went to Pumpkett School, currently doing my placement there, and try to stay involved in the community and to have an understanding. And probably about a year and a half ago, well, about a year ago, actually, I congratulate Pumpkett for celebrating 250 years. And about a year and a half, 2 years ago, the town and county of Antigonish decided to explore the possibility of consolidation, which at that time, if that were to have gone through, rezoning would have happened and fewer councillors would have been elected in the county, meaning Pumpkett would have been at risk for the representation. And at that time, I had gone to multiple meetings and there was no mention whatsoever of Pumpkett, the minority group of Acadians, and what that would look like for us and to move forward. And we've been lucky to have a school, as we talked about earlier, but we're almost, I think we're at 376 kids now. We had 5 portables just up until a few years ago, waiting for an expansion, which finally did come. And then the community center followed. And we've been very fortunate. But to move forward, what would be some suggestions if down through the pipelines the province tried to implement consolidation for Antigonish Town and County? How would you go about that for the outlook of Pumpkett and keeping that culture alive moving forward?
Well, there's a lot of things in that question, but I'll answer in part. What you have to do is, as a community or as a member of the community, the URB, the board, review board, there's at least one of my friends who's a member, who's bilingual, who's an Acadian, and you have to make your point that if they do amalgamate, you need to know if there will be a seat for Pumpkett for the linguistic minority. And if you don't ask, you don't get. But if you ask, you never know. And I'll give you an example. When the first Acadian School Board was created, they went around all the province. And they said, and they asked for opinions. And I presented a paper, and there was simultaneous translation anyway, and Roland Devaux was the president at the time of the commission. But I said, everyone had said that there should be only one member from each community. And I said, I disagree totally with that. There should be at least two, because before the CSAP, we had a school board that was comprised of 9 members with 1 Acadian. So we had 1 Acadian for 8 Anglophone English people to decide our French schools, the education. Now we're going to have 1 Acadian from Chéticamp against 8 Acadians from other areas to decide our French education in other areas. And it's not unimportant because, as I said, Chéticamp, the school, was the last one to be renovated from all the Acadian schools. But at least, and they agreed with me, and the first 15 years of the CSAP, they had 2 members from each community. So just to give you an example that sometimes you don't know. And for the protected ridings, had we not applied, we would not have had that decision from the court. And now you can use that decision to emphasize why you should have maybe a designated member from Pumket on that speaks French on that new, if they ever amalgamate with Antigonish. I mean, we can't get the impossible, but you can try. And you can ask, and if you don't, then you miss out. The other thing, like I'm saying, Chéticamp does not have a village commission, but maybe that decision could be used to show the government that now there's an act in the legislation of Nova Scotia, the legislation saying that you cannot form a village commission. Now there's been a moratorium, but maybe we could use that decision to do it. So will an MLA in Chéticamp save the language for the next 200 years? I don't know, but we'll try. But le prochain défi, the next challenge is finding the right person, if we get a riding, to find an Acadian that speaks French, to put his name up on the ballot to be elected as our MLA. Oui, madame.
Sénateur Aucoin, je voudrais vous demander une question sur protected riding, cette notion-là. J'ai l'impression que c'est incompris ou mal compris par la majorité. Et je pense historiquement aux messes qu'il y avait eu en 2012, la réforme.
2012,
sous le NPD.
Oui, sous le NPD.
Puis la notion de protected riding, ça avait été très chaud, puis ils avaient été obligés de se remettre à la tâche. Puis, alors, je voudrais vous entendre là-dessus que la majorité trouve que c'est comme unfair ou pas équitable, cette notion de protected riding. Quand on fait partie de la majorité, on a tendance à mal comprendre cette notion-là.
Okay. Ben, la notion, c'est que nous, comme j'ai expliqué au début, c'est que si on veut avoir une représentation, ça fait depuis 100 ans, 1925, qu'on n'a pas eu de membres de l'Assemblée législative qui parlaient le français. Pour la communauté de Chéticamp, on se sent pas toujours à la hauteur. C'est sûr que les membres de l'Assemblée législative viennent à Chéticamp, puis ils font de leur mieux, puis ils essayent de nous représenter, mais c'est pas la même chose que s'il y avait un Acadien à qui on verrait tous les jours dans le village. So it's important to have someone from your community because you feel like you've got a voice. Right now, most people in Chéticamp don't feel that they have a say in whatever happens in Nova Scotia. We have an MLA, we've always had one, but they're from Port Hood or Inverness or Mambu. But it's not the same thing as having someone from our own community. And so what a protected riding does, that's all it does, it permits, it gives the opportunity for minorities to get someone from the minority to get elected, whether it's an Acadian or whether it's a person of Black origin in Preston. It may not happen, but at least if we get a protected riding, and it doesn't really take anything away because the number of electors are sort of spread out in the province, and we could go into that. But for Chéticamp, when it came to Guysborough, people from Guysborough went to the commission and said it's too big a county. So in 5 lines, they said, you're right, we're going to cut it in half. But Inverness, which has mountains and it's almost as big as Guysborough and it's 230 kilometers long, they said, oh, well, no, we can't do that. So protected riding is just making it a smaller riding. And what happened in 2012 with the NDP government, they said, you have to take into consideration the Black, Mi'kmaq, and Acadian communities, but you cannot vary by more than 25%. So in effect, it did away with the protected ridings. So that's why there was a backlash. And in 2019, the new commission made sure that those 4, Clare, Argyll, Richmond, and Preston were reinstated. But they said no to Chéticamp once more.
There's time for one more quick question.
Last but not least.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My question is about minority language rights in general. So my father's Dutch. I don't speak Dutch. My father was encouraged as a new Canadian to speak English, and that's what he did with us. And I have gotten to know a lot of new Canadians, and they've told me that they've been struggling around if they go to a hospital, they can't make themselves clear. I think a lot of work is being done in that area, but I wonder about your thoughts around just the promotion of language in general. So we have Mi'kmaq course here at St. FX, where people can be encouraged to learn Mi'kmaq. I can go and take a French course. I can take German, Spanish. I think this is really something I would like to see more of, where people are encouraged, like yourself, to be bilingual, trilingual. And I wonder what kind of work you're doing at Senate and others to kind of, think about all these new languages that are coming to Canada. They're not new necessarily, but early Canada was French, English, and the Indigenous languages. And of course, as we've invited more people from once immigration opened up in the late 60s, early 70s, more language groups came. And I just wonder what you think about that and what role Senate can have in promoting language in general.
Merci. Well, it depends what kind of laws come to the Senate, but I can tell you that we have to be more open-minded. We have to be open to other cultures, and I know there's federal programs presently with immigration. Like there's a lot more pressure, a lot more programs put in today's world to accommodate the immigrants and in their language and trying to find services for them. For example, in Nova Scotia, l'Association des Juristes, we opened the Access Justice Center, which gives information to people who immigrate to Nova Scotia. And one of the things why the government funds these centers is because these immigrants coming from countries where they've got basically no rights, they think the police are going to attack them and beat them on the street. And if, for example, they have marital problems, some of them believe that there's nothing they can do. They can just they can't go to the courts in their country because, for example, if it's a woman, the man has all the rights and he owns the wife. So we have to educate them, but more and more these centers do it in the language of these immigrants. So it's not like in your father's time when he immigrated to Canada. I'm not saying it's perfect. What we do in the Senate, other than that, it depends of what will come. But I know, like in the Official Languages Act and in some of the issues that come up with Indigenous communities, I know language is important, and there's discussions as how to implement and how to deal with different languages with the Indigenous communities that are very important to the fabric of this country. Merci.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And please join me again thanking Senator Aucoin for coming today on behalf of the Mulroney Institute. Thank you. Thank you.
You'll have to send me how much it was because I have to declare it on my public account. Everything's public now.
So, folks, I hope you have a lovely drive home. It should be nice out there, I think, still. Cross fingers. And thank you for joining us over this year for our Sober Second Thought speaker series. And we've got one in the works for next year, all with the wonderful magic that Anna Juschlag does for us on a daily basis. So thank you, everyone, and have a good night.